Hey there, Drawyah here, and welcome to this tutorial where we shall take a look at the FlyByWire A32NX and go through the descent and approach procedure for this aircraft. This means setting up the MCDU with our star and approach runway, going through the EFBR electronic flight bag for our descent calculation and brake usage, and going through both a manual and auto-land procedure within this aircraft. It's highly recommended that you have a SimBrief flight plan to follow along, and so if you don't have a flight plan ready or don't know what SimBrief is, I recommend you click on the eye in the top right corner and go through that first before you proceed with the landing. However, if you are at cruise and ready to start your descents, then feel free to follow along. We'll now go through the procedure. So here we are at flight level 370 or 37,000 feet. We're continuing along with our flights from London Heathrow to Helsinki Vantaa, and right now we're about 160 miles away from the airport. A quick reminder of what we're looking at. On our left hand side we have our primary flight display, our PFD, which shows your basic flight information such as airspeed, altitude and artificial horizon. On your right hand side you've got your navigation display, or ND, which shows your routing to the airports. And then you have your upper and lower ECAMs, which gives you your flight information to keep your aircraft in the air. The first thing you want to do is head down to the MCDU, and what we're going to do is print out an updated weather sheet. We can do this by going over to the MCDU menu, going to ATSU, going to the AOC menu, weather request, and send. What this is going to do is request the weather information in the METAR string and send that to your FMS to prints. We know it's arrived when you look at the upper ECAM, and you'll see that we received the company message, just like that. So look back at the MCDU, we'll return to the AOC menu, we'll go over to received messages, select the new message that's arrived, and just press on the print button. If we head down to the lower right hand side of the pedestal, you'll see that the printer is now printing out a sheet. Just click on that when it's done, return to the MCDU menu position, and have a look at the updated weather. So right now we're looking at wind speeds of 8 knots heading 270, plus 10 visibility, broken clouds reported at 600 feet, 13 degrees centigrade 2.13, with QNH of 992. So as it stands, it's not too bad in terms of clouds, some low coverage but clear visibility. Temperature's quite warm at the moment, and the winds relatively light heading in the 270 direction. So we're landing on runway 22 left, which is currently the active runway, and therefore that should work in our favour. What we're now going to do is set up our star. So head back to the flight plan, we'll select our destination airport of Helsinki, Echo Foxtrot Hotel Kilo, click on the arrival index, and we can now see is a different list of approaches. These are all the runways and all the approach options available for them, generally in the form of localizers, ILS approaches, and VOR points. ILSs and localizers are relatively similar in how they work, in that for both of these you'll hook onto the ILS frequency of the runway, and on the localizer it will just focus on your heading as opposed to altitude, and your ILS will combine both your altitude and your heading together. VORs work a little different in that what you're doing is pointing your aircraft towards a non-directional beacon, an NDB, and pointing your aircraft towards that for your approach. Those could be a little trickier to perfect, but with enough practice, they're not too difficult to do. For this tutorial, we'll cover the ILS for both landings, but generally ILS and localizers do work in very similar ways. So right now, we're looking at runway 22 left as active at Helsinki. You can find your active runway based on your SimBrief flight plan, or if there's active tower on a network such as iVal and VATSIM, check the METAR and that'll give you the active runway. But if there's no active tower or you're flying offline, then stick to your SimBrief flight plan is your defaults. So we'll be landing on the ILS runway 22 left. We can select that, and what we now get is a selection of stars, our standard terminal arrival routing. And so this is a predefined set of waypoints that tower can give to you, and essentially guides the aircraft from your final waypoint to the runway on an efficient route away from other traffic departing, as well as different airspace rulings. So for this arrival, we're looking at the Lacourt 4 Alpha arrival. We can scroll down to the Lacourts. Now, on this occasion, we have got a Lacourt 5 Alpha as opposed to 4 Alpha. On this occasion, that's no problem. It's not always going to be the same in terms of the number and the actual routing. So for example, different arrivals, different routings can give you slightly different number or approach routing, but essentially we're looking at the Lacourt arrival, which is the most important part, as it takes us from the Lacourt waypoint to the runway. So Lacourt 5 Alpha brings us from the final waypoint of Lacourt to runway 22 left, which you've got selected. So select it. We're not going in via any approaches, so we'll just clear that. Insert it to the flight plan, and as you can see, we now have a longer flight plan with much more waypoints and routings included. We can also look at the navigation display, switch over to plan mode and zoom in slightly just to see how our approach will work. So using the up and down arrows to go step by step through all the waypoints, you can see we fly to the north of Helsinki for looping around and coming into south from the northeast. So nice and steady approach that, should work quite nicely for us. We'll return back to the arc mode, zoom out on the map slightly, and make sure that our approach routing is all visible on the map. At this point, we're now 134 miles away from Helsinki. We're now going to calculate our descents. So if we head over to the EFB tablet on the left hand side, what we're going to do is head over to the calculator, and what we're going to do is check out where our top descent will be. So for Helsinki runway 22 left, our intercept altitude of glide slope is 3,000 feet. You can check these based on your charts information, which you can get either through Navigraph or can be found very easily online. And so for our descent to reach 3,000 feet, we can set our target altitude as 3,000. Our current altitude you can type in manually or press the sync button, and that will sync it to your aircraft's targets. So in order to descend from 37,000 feet to 3,000 feet at a 3 degree descent angle, we'll start the descent at 107 miles. With 126 left to go, it means that we've got around 20 miles to go now before we start our descent. What you also need to do is set up our approach phase. Click on the performance button and click on next phase, and here you can see a blank template of the information we need to fill in. Now this information is either found on the weather sheets that you just printed out, or on your chart information. So our QNH, our pressure on arrival, is currently 9 at 902, therefore type in 992 and paste it into QNH. Temperature Helsinki right now is 13 centigrade, so type in 13, paste it there. Winds detected are 220 at 8 knots, so type in 220 / to break two blocks of information up. It's 8 knots, input that. Transition altitude at Helsinki is 5,000 feet, as according to the charts. So type that in, paste in transition altitude, and our barometer, our minimums, is going to be at 331. And so the Airbus A320 is a Class C aircraft, being a jetliner, and therefore we'll follow Class C for this type of aircraft, and depending on the approach we're going to do, in this case an ILS approach catch 1, 331 will be our minimums, and therefore what our minimums is our minimum safe approach altitude in the A320, where the runway has to be visible to us before we call a go-around. If we're below minimums, no runway is visible, we go around. If we're below minimums and the runway is visible, then we continue our approach and bring the aircraft into land. As well as this, we also need to calculate the aircraft's braking. So head back to the FB tablets, click on the landing page, type in your overall ICAO code, which in this case is Echo Foxtrot Hotel Kilo, pull the METAR information, make sure if flaps set correctly, in this case we're using full flaps landing, there's no overweight requirements, we are using reverse thrusts, and the runway currently is dry, and what we're going to do is click on calculate. So as you can see, runway 22 at Helsinki, if we use max braking, we use 1,100 metres of the runway, medium braking 1,400, and low braking 2,059 metres of the runway before coming to a halt. Now, at Helsinki, we can use the majority of the runway before exiting in order to get to the gates, and therefore I think we're quite happy to stick with low braking for this approach. So return back to the centre pedestal, look up to the right hand side here, and set your auto brake to whatever you require. So in this case, we're using low brakes for approach. If using medium, use medium, using max, use max, but use low brakes on this occasion to bring the aircraft to a halt. And so what we've done is we've set up our star, set up our runway, checked the descent calculation, and are now ready to start our descent. Now, as we get closer to our top of descent, what we're going to want to do is reset our MCP altitude to our target. So on this occasion, it's 3,000 feet. We're going to scroll down the altitude on the autopilot until it reaches 3,000, but we're not going to press on the button just yet. We'll leave the aircraft at cruise for a little bit longer, and just wait and see until we hit that 107 marker, which on this occasion we now have. What we can now do is press on the altitude knob, see that the white or the yellow dots has now appeared, and the aircraft will start its descent. What we can also do is zoom in on the ND slightly, just to make sure that the entire approach and airport is also visible on the map. Now in terms of what the A32NX is capable of doing right now, is it's not so much yet on VNAV, but it is possible to follow constraints. And so with the aircraft calculated to follow a 3-degree descent path down, the aircraft will automatically always refer to that 3 degrees down as your descent rate. So your speed and your altitude doesn't so much matter in terms of your descent, but your angle of attack certainly does. So the aircraft will aim for 3 degrees down as a constant angle throughout your descent. You can keep an eye on your descent rates based on your FMS altitude, now 99, and your tail on the left, showing 199. So as you can see, we're pretty much bang on with our distance right now. If we keep on tracking, now it's reads 98, on the MCP, reads 97, so bang on just about. You might get a little bit too many, a little bit too short, but as you descend, that number will adjust based on your speed and your altitude. So we've started our descent, and we are now leaving cruising altitude for the arrival. We are now approaching 20,000 feet. What we're going to do is head over to the overhead panel, and we're going to reactivate the passenger seatbelt signs, send them back to their seats. What we also want to do is head back to the FMS and head over to the radio navigation page. Now this bit here is important to us. We want to make sure that our ILS frequency is established and make sure that everything's connected as it should be. So as you can see, automatically we're connected to Helsinki at 110.3. Based on the charts, I can see that's correct. The localizer 110.3 and HK is the marker. Therefore, that is our correct approach. Now, sometimes this isn't automatic. Some airports do require you to manually input your landing frequency, but on this occasion, that's done automatically, and there's nothing for you to input. Quick check of the flight plan again. We can see that we are 53 miles away from Helsinki, and our descent marker is at 49. So once again, we're now bang on track, if anything, slightly better than where we should be. But we won't adjust anything just yet, because as it stands, the 53 miles takes us right down to the runway at Helsinki, while in reality, we want to be about 3,000 feet, about 10 miles away. So, balancing out a lot of descent rates, make sure everything is still correct. If you're a little bit too high, then you can adjust your descent rate manually by pulling on the knob and increasing your descent rate slightly by pulling on the right hand knob and increasing your vertical speed. Same, slow it down a bit, just decrease it slightly, but to keep the aircraft stable, just push the knob down and the aircraft will do the rest automatically without any input from the pilots. And that's one of the things with the Airbus that makes it such an easy aircraft to fly, is the fact that systems are so automated that essentially the aircraft does everything for you. You just sit back, relax, and let the airplane do the hard work for you. We are now approaching 10,000 feet. What you'll notice is the aircraft will start to level off slightly, as what it wants to do is bleed off its speed to hit 250 knots below 10,000. You can assist it by increasing the spoilers, and what we'll now do is increase the rate of the slowdown, as spoilers are these little flaps on the edge of the wings here that essentially break the airflow around the wing and allow you to bleed off speed. So as you approach that 250, what we can do is bring these speed brakes back into their upper position, now retracted, and from there the aircraft will continue to descent below 10,000 at 250 knots. At 10,000 we also need to make sure that our landing lights are turned back on by activating both the landing lights and the nose takeoff lights, and also we want to activate the landing system, the ILS, on the upper dashboard. So activate ILS on the left and right hand side. And what that will do is start to establish a connection from the aircraft to the runway. So as you can see, we're connected to Helsinki at 1.3, and right now we are 8 miles away from the airport. As our aircraft slows and we get closer to the airport, what we're also going to need to do is start thinking about our flaps. Now if we head over to our aircraft's performance page, as you can see our approach speed will be 128 knots, with our landing speed at 123. We've set our aircraft up for a 4 flaps landing. We can switch between 4 flaps and config 3 by pressing the button on the right hand side here, and all that essentially means is we either use flaps 4 for landing or flaps 3. So on this occasion we'll use flaps 4. What we're going to do is lower our flaps into the number 1 position. You can monitor this by either looking at the flaps lever on the right hand side, or by looking at the flaps option on the upper ECAM. So as you can see, the flaps slowly lower into the number 1 position. Now do be aware that by lowering flaps, what you're also going to do is start to slow down the aircraft speed. So you can see we've levelled off and the speed will start to slow. Once again, feel free to introduce some spoilers to help the aircraft slow down, and once you hit that lower speed, then the aircraft continues descent. Don't be afraid to use spoilers, as especially in the latter stages of descent, you do need to use it to help the aircraft getting down, but don't forget to retract them every time, as the last thing you want to do is hit that final approach with your spoilers still out, and potentially a risk of stalling your aircraft out. So use spoilers to help you, but don't be too excessive. So retract spoilers, continue our descent, and very shortly the aircraft will make a right hand turn to bring us around to the runway heading. As we hit transition, don't forget to reset to your altimeter. In this case it's set 9 at 9 at 2. But don't forget to reset your altimeter as soon as ATC give it to you. On this occasion without ATC, we do it at transition altitude. Now as we make this final turn to bring us onto the runway heading, what we want to do is focus on our PFD. There's a horizontal bar at the bottom and a vertical bar on the right. This is your guidance system to the runway. The horizontal shows you your heading to the runway if you're too far to the left, too far to the right, and it's your altitude if you're too low or too high. And so essentially what you want to do is make sure that the purple diamonds, the magenta diamonds, are centered and in the middle when we make our approach. So keep an eye on the horizontal diamond for now as you fly towards the runway, but not quite at the direct heading. As you continue our approach, we'll now lower the aircraft's flaps into the second position, flaps 2. Now, as you can see, the horizontal diamond is now moving closer to the middle. As soon as that diamond makes contact with the yellow centre mark here, what it's going to do is activate the aircraft localizer. What the localizer does is essentially it flies your aircraft on runway heading towards the runway. So you have your localizer, which is essentially your LNAV of your approach, and your approach, which is essentially your VNAV approach, and just your altitude to the runway. So diamond's made contact. We'll activate the localizer. What the aircraft will now do is adjust its position to ensure that you're bang on centre of the runway, flying right down the middle. As you can now see, the horizontal diamond is now, the vertical diamond is now making its move down, and once again, as soon as it makes contact with that yellow horizontal marker, activate the approach mode, and the aircraft now starts to follow the glide slope down. As the aircraft does this, we'll load the flaps into number 3 position. And as the diamond makes contact, we'll now activate the approach mode. You can see that we've now moved on to CATS 3 single, with our glide slope now active. So following the localizer and the glide slope down, we bang perfect centre of the runway, and all that's left for us to do is bring the aircraft into land. Now visibility could perhaps be a little bit better, but for the most part it should be clear enough for us to make a landing, and therefore we'll do a manual landing first, deactivate the Autopilot 1000 and bring the aircraft into land. We have our minimum set to 331 feet, and so as long as we have runway visibility at 331, we'll be able to continue our approach and carry on, bring the aircraft into land. Now the aircraft is slightly crabbing, we're not flying on a straight line heading the runway, and that's because of the crosswind you have right now. So at the moment it's detecting 80 knot wind at 318, and so as we get close to the runway that should start to stabilise, but worst case scenario, if you are crabbing on the final approach, kick a bit of rudder, send the aircraft in just before touchdown, and they'll keep you on the centre line, right down to the end of the runway. As you can now see, our right-hand ECAM is updated. Make sure the flaps are in the landing position. At about 5 miles, we'll load landing gear, so landing gear set up just for now. We will do the cabin check, pressing the all button. Arm spoilers by pulling on the lever. And as you cross that 5 mile marker, load the landing gear and wait for it to mark all through as green. And so with our landing gear down, our pre-land checklist is now complete. The runway's now in sight. And as you can see, right now, we are bang on the money. 2 red, 2 white on the pappies, that means we are centre on the runway. If it's too many whites, so 3 or 4 whites, we're too high. 3 or 4 reds, into too low, and therefore go around. As we cross your 1,000 feet, we'll hear the 1,000 callouts. We will deactivate the autopilot, set the altitude to our go-around altitude, in this case 4,000 feet, and now using our pappies and PFD as our guidance, essentially keep the aircraft as centered as possible and touch down right on the markers. Now don't worry if the aircraft goes a little bit off-centered, a little bit off balance. Essentially you can make your adjustments right up to the runway to keep the aircraft centered. But if you do feel like you are missing the approach and you are missing the mark, then always go around and always try again. It's better to be safe than sorry, better go around and try again, than end up crashing too short or too far the runway.
Above. 200. 100. 50, 40, 30, 20.
As you hear the retarder, idle the throttles, pull back on the stick gently, and bring the aircraft in for a gentle touchdown. Set the reversers, keep the aircraft centered, and naturally bring the aircraft to a halt. Knots, 80 knots, 60 knots, cut the reversers, and exit the runway when available. Now, as soon as we clear of the runway markers, what you can do is raise your flaps, lower your spoilers, turn off your landing lights, turn on your taxi lights, and start your APU ready for when you get to the gates. Now how about if you're caught out with weather like this? There's low visibility all the way to the ground, it's raining quite heavily outside, and so performing a manual landing is perhaps not the safest thing to do. What we're now going to do is perform a CATS III Autoland. The process itself to set up is very similar to a standard ILS approach, but on this occasion, when we set up our approach mode, instead of having just the one autopilot active, We'll also activate the co-pilot's number 2 autopilot, and also, instead of turning off the autopilot at 1,000 feet, we'll leave both running until the moment we hit the ground. So, as we did before, we're keeping an eye on the horizontal and the vertical magenta diamonds on screen, and waiting for them to both hit their center points, their midpoints, on each respective diagram. So we're about 60 miles away from Helsinki right now. We are connected to the localizer 11.3 at 15.3 miles away. And so what we're keeping an eye for is first of all the horizontal, the localizer, to hit the centre. You may see the vertical as well start to descend, but that we'll deal with later, as the first thing you want to do is make sure you're on the localizer and heading towards the runway. We now approach the BIFIX point. That means we'll be getting close to our alignment position. There you go, there's your horizontal bar. And as soon as that magenta diamond hits the yellow marker, what we're going to do is activate the localizer. Like so. Now as you can see, we're almost with the vertical as well on the centre. And so keep our finger on the approach button. And as soon as that diamond touches the bar, we'll activate the approach phase, but also the second autopilots. So system 1 and 2 are active. You can see Cat 3 Dual is now up on the primary flight display, autopilots 1 and 2 is active, and the aircraft will now follow the glide slope. Now as we did before, we'll monitor the approach as we get closer to the airports. We'll load flaps into position 3 and 4 respectively, load landing gear between 5 to 7 miles, and then, during touchdown, we'll leave the autopilots on, but reduce throttles when it calls out the retarder. So there's Helsinki at the top of our ND now. Currently on flaps 3. Gear still up. We'll lower that in a couple of moments. So the localizer is active, we're following the glide slope, the aircraft's maintaining our speed, and everything you can see right now, it's all automated and being performed by the aircrafts. Quick look outside, we still have no visibility to the ground, and technically we should still be following the minimums at 331, but being Autoland, there is generally a little bit more leeway in regards to when you do call out your go around.
2,500.
As it stands, we're looking at a gusting wind heading around 272. So the speed itself jumps around, well, between 9 to about 12-13 knots, and therefore we can see a turbulence definitely starting to act on the aircraft, with a little bit of shaking on the approach. Once again, our ECAM comes to life with our landing checklist. Landing gear, we'll leave it for a couple of seconds. Cabin, we'll check. Spoilers, will alarm. And the flaps full, we'll do that at the same time as landing gear. So yeah, we're about 6 miles from the airport now, 6.3. So we'll load the landing gear, load the flaps into its full position, and as soon as the gear comes down with 3 green, our pre-land checklist is now complete. So keeping one hand on the throttle and your other hand on the stick, but not applying any pressure, as applying pressure will deactivate the autopilot and therefore disconnect you from the Autoland. So keep the aircraft steady, but we're not actually doing any pressure to move the aircraft from its current course. Now 1,000 feet above the ground, still not turning off autopilot, and the aircraft continue on its automated approach. The ground is ever so slightly coming into view, but definitely nothing that you're going to do manually on this occasion. Wipers, you can activate via the two switches on the overheads. Minimums. Ground is visible, we'll continue. And so keeping on the PFD now, very shortly, it'll move into the landing phase, like so, and that will confirm that the aircraft's now coming to land. Runways in sight. 2 red, 2 white on the pappy, so bang on the centre.
200.
Now we're listening for the retarder and for the PFD to show idle.
30. 20.
We'll cut the throttle back, and the aircraft will come in for a touchdown. Now one thing the Autoland will also do is keep the aircraft on the centre line. It won't deviate, it won't move to left or right, but the brake's active, reverse is set as well. It'll slow the aircraft down and slowly bring it to a halt. 6 knots, cut the reversers, cut the brakes, and exit the runway when available. As we apply rudder, the autopilot will now disconnect, and we're in full control of the aircraft on the ground. And that right there is a successful Autoland in the A32NX. And like before, as you exit the runway, flaps up, spoilers up, landing lights off, taxi lights set, and APU will start. Now on arrival at the gate, presuming it's been set up correctly, you will be greeted by a set of ground services, and this includes a person with the wands to guide your aircraft onto the centre line. So here at Helsinki, where it stands to 4, we're going to make a right hand turn to bring our aircraft onto the centre line. Always look into where you're turning, just to ensure that you are in the correct position. Turn off your taxi lights, so that you're not blinding anyone on the ground crew. And just focus on the person with the wands to bring your aircraft as close to the centre line as possible. So right now bang centre. If we're too far to the left, they'll guide us to the right. If we're too far to the right, they'll guide us to the left. So keep the aircraft as centred as possible. Bring it nice and steady. And as they start to cross their arms above their heads, that would be essentially when they tell you to stop. So carry on a little bit further. They'll cross their arms. And hold the position. Apply the parking brakes. Switch over to the APU bleed. Cut your engines, as you arrive at your destination airports. And as you arrive at the airports, you can also start to call the ground services over where available. Switch off your beacon lights as soon as your N2 drops below 0.8. And as soon as external power is available, you can switch over to external power and turn off the APU. Also, don't forget to switch off seatbelt sign and allow passengers to disembark the aircrafts and make their way into the terminal. And just like that, you successfully landed the FlyByWire A32NX in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And so there you have it, 4 flights through 2 tutorials, one showing your departure, one showing your arrival, for the ever popular Microsoft Flight Sim add-on aircrafts. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos. If you did, then please do consider leaving a like, and do subscribe too, if you haven't done so already, as it does help channel layouts. Otherwise, I thank you for watching, and hope to see you again in the very near future. Take care of yourselves, and many happy virtual hours. Take care, and bye-bye.